the logo.
Oh, yes. I'm using the standard template to this time, so we're improving slowly. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for the August 31st meeting of the GIS Advisory Council. As you know, we meet every couple of months and kind of talk about updates from the GIS office, but also kind of attempting to kind of spur more discussion amongst this group so that they can kind of better fulfill their advisory role. Here's the proposed agenda. We'll go through a round of introductions as a way of taking attendance. I'll give some introductory remarks. We'll open it up for a public comment period. Briefly, then we'll go through any meeting administration if there is any. Then we'll go through a kind of quick fire series of updates on the activities of the GIS office in the last couple of months, because we've had some interesting milestones and developments. And then the hope is to have a couple of the more kind of focused discussions on the parcel drafting guidelines document headed up by Thad, and the GIS Clearinghouse working group headed up by Emily. Beyond that, we'll wrap up, and then that should be it. So introductions, we'll just go right down the line and as a way of taking attendance. So I'm Alfredo, GIO. You guys can just go ahead down the line in the order you see it. I believe Scott.
Scott, I'm the CDO, present.
Hello, my name is Stuart Dillon. I'm here.
Sorry, I was muted. Jenny Pacherio, CTDOT.
Dan Chaya, DESPP.
Gary Archambault, DPH.
Eric Snowden, Capital Region Council of Governments.
Thad Dymkowski, Town of South Windsor on behalf of CCM.
Mark Hoover, MetroCog.
John Guskowski, Tyche Planning and Policy Group, also on behalf of CCM.
Emily Wilson, Yukon.
Do we have Peter on the call? I didn't see him. That's okay. Go ahead, Meg.
Meg McGaffin, SLR Consulting.
All right, that's everybody but Peter. If he shows up later, we'll acknowledge him. But and as always, as has been thus far, the second General Assembly seat is still vacant. So yeah, that's the thing. So introductory remarks. So we all know the GIS office has been the thing. Here are the things we do. Some of the things, just to recap, we are now fully staffed. We got our 2 analysts as of last month. So we had hired Leah Hodges and Sarah Hurley. Leah started in June and Sarah started in July. They've been doing really great work for us, as you will see a little bit further ahead in some of the updates. So that's kind of where we are with staffing. Additionally, we've been generally just kind of hard at work with our heads down, just kind of getting a bunch of things done, trying to make sure that we coordinate across the state agencies and just move things along as we think that they should be moved along. So we'll get into those updates here in a few minutes. Beyond that, I think I will pause here to open it up for public comments. If there are any members of the public that would like to say a few words or ask a few questions of either the GIS office or the council, now's a good time. Okay, you don't have to be shy. All right, well, if nobody has any comments, then we will move on to some of the priority topics and the working group updates, generally speaking. So first update I would like to talk about is the NISGIC Geospatial Maturity Assessment. This is the second time that we've had this done. The first one was in 2021, in which State of Connecticut received a letter grade of B. And in this year, I'm happy to say that we improved ever so slightly to a B+. So biggest difference here is that on the coordination, we went from a D to an A, mostly because now there's a GIO and a GIS office, which hooray. I think the other, the reason it wasn't a bigger jump is that the address category went from an A to a C+. That is just kind of a result of us in the GIS office really digging into that data set and some of the processes behind it so that this grade, I think, is a little bit more reflective of reality, of the reality that's going on with the addresses and addressing, which David will talk about a little bit more of where we are with that later during the update. Beyond that, there are a couple of other things where we did not get an A or kind of a high grade. One of them is the orthoimagery leaf on, which I know in Connecticut is, it's still a very useful data set, but we don't particularly tend to go out of our way to procure that. We tend to focus much more on the leaf off imagery because, we have so much vegetation, we can't see anything if all the leaves are on. So there's that. There are reasons where we would want to, if that's something that someone feels strongly about that we should, work on or change. I don't particularly see us kind of focusing on that as a priority topic for ourselves. That being said, I did hear through panels from the vendors doing the work that we will be receiving a NAPE flight that is leaf on this year, and it will be available around the same time that our leaf off flight. So we are going to be flush with imagery this year, which will be very, very nice. So we are getting our 3-inch imagery, which we will talk a little bit more about later. But we are also going to be receiving 6-inch NAPE leaf on imagery as well. If my understanding is that it was flown over the summer or here coming up either just flown in August, sometime relatively recently, and it should be processed in time for like November, December. Beyond that is geodetic control. Public land surveying system as heavily as states out west. So geodetic control, while still important for us in the work we do, isn't quite as critical for kind of identification of like all of those fancy corners that people in the western states have. Once again, I'm open to discussion on this particular topic to see if this should be a priority, but generally, I just would like to open it up now to the council members to comment or ask questions about this or any of the topics here. And yeah, Eric, go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry. Much as I would never complain about an A- with my own grades, I'm just wondering why the elevation was only an A- when it seems that we have a pretty good base. I mean, even if you go back to the previous flight, we have pretty good stuff compared to other states, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think it's
Is it just the age of it?
Yeah, I think it's the age combined with the fact that it's QL2. Like the USGS is starting to move to QL1, so there's a big push there, and people are kind of very interested in that. I think that's probably going to go to A+ if there is such a category with them with this new data, as you guys will see shortly when I show off some of the pilot data that we received.
Thanks.
Yep. Any additional questions or comments about the geospatial maturity assessment? Additionally, NISGIC has offered us a chance for comment and questions. I think one of the I don't know if this is going to be in my formal response, but one of the things I will ask of them, whether it's in the formal response or else or through another way, is kind of what is some of what is the weighting on some of the federal led themes, because I think those are in particular, like the geodetic control and the ortho imagery, the leaf-on imagery stuff is not a huge priority for us here in Connecticut and more widely in like New England states. So it seems like we're being, depending on how the weighting is set up, which I haven't like dug into the methodology yet to see what it is, if we're being kind of penalized for things that we don't actively have a huge use for. So those are questions that I'm going to ask of them once I do a little bit of homework and when I attend the conference here coming up in September. Are there any other questions that I should be asking of them related to this stuff that anybody can think of? All right, cool. So moving on to aerial imagery acquisition, everybody's favorite topic. So just to recap, we did purchase 2 flights, one this year and one coming up in 2026. They should be both the same as far as products and deliverables. Dewberry is the one doing the work. And so the specific things that were purchased are 3-inch 4-band imagery for the entire state, QL1 spec LiDAR data, but with an increased point density of 20 points per square meter on the coastal area and 15 points per square meter everywhere else. We are getting a 0.5 meter DEM, not a 1 meter DEM from that. We are getting the same 1-foot contours that we got from the 2016 flight. However, there is a very big difference between the contours from this flight and the contours from the 2016 flight, which we will have an example of short in the next slide. We are also getting building footprints for every structure larger than 100 square feet for the entire state, as well as a 3D terrain model with the level of detail to buildings. And I'd also like to add that the 3D, both the 2D and the 3D buildings are LiDAR derived, not imagery derived. So we're hoping to have greater positional and detail accuracy on both of those because of that. And the one thing I didn't put in there that we also did purchase is additional LiDAR classifications for low, medium, and high vegetation. We are still working a little bit of back and forth after seeing some of the pilot data for adjusting what those what the height ranges for those categories are. I think the consensus is that we need to make the middle category a little bit taller so that we can kind of are more easily able to select out kind of medium height decorative trees versus like the really tall stuff. So yeah, that's basically everything that we bought. So this imagery, that image that you see right there actually is the imagery from the pilot data. And I kind of, made some art and overlaid the DEM as a hill shade as an overlay to kind of make a shaded relief effect. Looks really pretty, looks really nice, but that is the actual data that we got from the pilot. As you can see, it's pretty fantastic. The even better thing is that it zooms way in. Like I said, it zooms as far in as the imagery that we're used to from 2016. I will note that the imagery will look different as far as color gradients. From the 2016 flight, this imagery was produced to USGS spec, which is a much more muted color range. However, if you do a little bit of light stretching, it looks phenomenal, and all of the detail is still there. The sensor did capture it all. So it may take a little bit of additional processing when you bring it in. We will definitely be playing with those settings a little bit when we make the services for publication, but we will try and strike a balance between appearance and quality. Megan, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I was just wondering, I don't know what level of detail 2 means in terms of 3D terrain. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so the level of detail 2 is specific to the buildings, not the terrain. So the terrain model is basically just it's basically a surf. We create a surface from the DEM and the elevation data so that we can overlay the buildings on top of it. The level of detail 2 for the building specifically means that instead of just an extruded square, like you see in, actually I didn't have that example, but so I'll put this slide up so we can look at the eye candy. But so instead of, we'll basically take level of detail 1 is you extrude the building footprint in like a big block. Level of detail 2, you start getting into the pitched roofs and, you know, segmenting the roof so you can see the air handlers on top of buildings and things like that. And there's just a lot more detail in there, and it's a little bit more representative of what the structure looks like. As you can imagine, this is a really powerful tool for planning and visualization, both for zoning and things like that. So that's largely
awesome.
the difference.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So here in the image are 3 image kind of samples of the point cloud visualized in different ways. As you can see, these are all, I believe, from the coastal area. The sample area is in East Haven, Brantford, kind of crosses the border. As you can see, you can really see some of the details with the through the water, see all the trees, the roads, things like that. Here in particular, we're wanting to call out the contour lines have a lot of specificity to them. You can see the crown of the road here, and then you can also see how the contours will show how, like, the drainage areas. There are other examples where you actually see the low spots around drains and parking lots, and it's like, you know, you look at it and it's like, oh, okay, that's great. That, you know, they designed that parking lot correctly. But there are other even more kind of fantastic examples in the other pilot area that we received, which is not pictured, where you can see a rock wall in the middle of the woods in the contours, not just the DEM or the hillshade. We are seeing contours around the pools, like large pools. We were seeing contours that go around erratics and other large boulders on the rocks. So I think there was a lot of additional detail in the contours that we haven't seen before. But I think if we put this into context, the new LiDAR data is a factor of 10 more dense than the stuff from 2016, because the stuff from 2016 is 2 per square meter. This, and on the coast, it is literally 20, so it's 10 times more points to choose from. So we're going to be able to see a heck of a lot more detail. Overall, like, you know, we're even getting ideas of like, hey, can we do a rough cut of sidewalk and pavement condition from the LiDAR data? That might be able to be possible with like a gradient map of like elevations, because we have such granularity in it. So yeah, any questions on the LiDAR and imagery stuff?
Yeah, I have another one, Alfredo.
Sure.
So in 2016, when the contour data was served out, yeah, it was that then was a massive data set, and it was parsed out into these 8 large chunks. And so for my firm at the time, I downloaded all that data and carved it up by town. Will the state be able to do that in terms of a deliverable, or how will the data be made accessible for consumption?
That's a good question. We're still exploring different options. I think there will likely be either, I don't know if we're ambitious enough to take on like a single unified service, but there will be a service where there are contiguous features for the whole thing. We'll have to investigate to see if it makes sense to do a segmented by town version of it. We'll take a look at that, unless Emily wants to chime in.
Yeah, we have talked about this, Meg, and it's something that the GIS office is going to take on, and not
Okay.
CC Eco this time.
Yeah.
One thing that I say over and over is that we need to have it available in more than just geodatabase format. We've had a lot of problems with our CAD users specifically because they cannot use that Esri specific format and need shape files.
I have to say that I have staff in my office that has shown me how they connect geodatabases to CAD now. So
Oh, okay. Maybe you
yeah,
can write a little help page for
yeah,
us.
yeah. That
Um,
that would be that would be fine.
uh,
And we do have, some processing power in the office. So if you need like an in-kind donation to like, split these all up by the towns, because if I'm going to do it anyway, like, whatever, we can make an arrangement on that. But you're
Yep.
saying that the GIS office is going to handle it this time.
the
Correct.
service at least,
Yeah.
like for consumption, it's statewide consumption. Like you said, it's a gigantic data set to do. And actually
Yeah.
deep created that service initially with the 2016, and it does
Mhm.
have a couple of problems. But yeah, for download of just files, that's something CTECO can do. But I think the service type stuff is something
Yeah.
that the GIS office will do. So certainly on our radar.
And I don't mean to jump the gun, Alfredo, but this kind of ties into my question and if you're going to address it later, that's fine. Are the town boundary revisions, are you going to talk about that in this meeting, or is that a wait till later thing?
That is a future topic. We're still working on some of the details
Okay.
with those. We have been doing some work, in particular on the coastline delineation stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that I will say that is a topic for a later date.
Okay, cool.
We're still kind of actively working out some of the kinks and looking up statutes and things like that to kind of really get a good handle on what it should be and what it shouldn't be and what it can be and what it can't be. So I will say later
Cool.
on that
All right.
particular topic.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, but I think also for a little bit of context and clarity for everyone, I think the plan for hosting is for the raster stuff in particular to be hosted over with CTECO and Emily's group, and then all of the vector data, building footprints, 3D stuff, contours will be handled by the GIS office and published through the geodata portal. That being said, all of the stuff that Emily posts will get included into will be added as services to their REST endpoint and their AGOL and then federated over through the geodata portal. So all of this data will be available through the geodata portal. And the nice thing about that is that then you can choose your format of downloading for whatever is available for that type of data set. So I don't know if DWGs are available, but you can at least download as a shapefile or a KML or something like that if that's easier for someone else to handle. So, any additional questions on the imagery and the elevation data?
Sorry if I missed this, but when do you expect this to be fully delivered?
End of the year. So per the contract, they have until November 30th. We'll see if they actually make it for this flight. But as I'm very keen to remind Dewberry and others, we do not have that leeway in 2026 because of the way the funding is structured. So they have to have everything in by end of November so that we have time to process and then execute other dependent agreements that need to end by the end of the year because of the type of funding that we're using. So my anticipation is that everything except for the 3D buildings will be delivered by beginning of December, and then the 3D buildings themselves will be delivered January, February of the following year.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else before I move on to the next topic? All right, cool. Moving right along. So now I'm going to pass it off to Carl to talk about the updates to the strategic plan and the process that we've been going through to create that plan.
Thank you, Alfredo. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. This is going to be very quick. So the GIS office has been working on a geospatial strategic plan, as many of you know, and this is the first of its kind for the new GIS office. And basically, when we first conceived of it, it followed a three-part format, which is data collection, the strategic planning process, where we interpret the data and come up with themes, and then an implementation plan that arises out of that. And as you can see on the table in front of you, the data collection phase is finished, including interviews and surveys. Many of you participated, and I appreciate that. When we last met, you saw a summary data collection report that highlighted a lot of the key themes that come out of the data collection process. And now the next phase over the next 2 months, basically from August through about the end of September, roughly, there are going to be a series of outreach events, some internal, some external, where people provide their input to the kind of aggregated themes, like communication would be a big aggregated theme. So we've had an internal review. We will also have a work group that some of you will participate in, and they will also have a chance to review. We're going to have 3 stakeholder events where we go out to the community. I will be in, along with Alfredo, we'll be in Ridgefield, Colchester, and Farmington in the middle of the month. And those will be a chance to get input from people in the community, especially the GIS community, about which things in this master list we've generated for the data collection phase are the highest priorities. Eventually, sometime in October or early November, there will be a outreach to the advisory council, and then we'll, as a summation of that, this will lead to the implementation phase. Implementation phase will be specific objectives that we will try to address over the next 5 years. Things like identifying potential funding, critical programs, ethical and societal issues that we want to address. So it's basically a culmination of the collective vision and mission of our group out to the stakeholders. And then in November, we tentatively have a presentation of the entire plan at the GIS Day, and then a series of finished deliverables will come immediately after that, after the kind of this final presentation and review. So that's kind of where we're at. This right now we're in the phase where we're holding out and waiting for all the stakeholder inputs. Then there'll be a rewriting process. We do have internally written drafts for almost everything now. So once we have the final stakeholder involvement, the output document should come fairly quickly after that. So that's all I have. Any questions from anyone, please?
If I may, before Meg goes ahead. So I think this is, obviously this is a great amount of work that Carl's done, and so far the what we've seen of the stakeholder data collection has been very helpful and very informative, and kind of helping guide kind of what we're doing. I think ultimately, as we start wrapping up, I want to think about this in the context of the GIS Advisory Council, and figure out like, how are we going to adopt this? Are we going to create some sort of formal approval, things like that, of this document? Because I think per the statute, this document is coming from the advisory council more than it is the GIS office. So I want to make sure that all of you have a chance to weigh in, and you review the document before it is kind of like officially official, if you will. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. We will continue that discussion, and like, if we need to go full formal and vote on it, we'll kind of start down the road of creating more formal bylaws for this group, so that we could, by the time that we do have to quote unquote approve this document, we have those in place, and we can then do that. And as we start moving forward with other things, like actually creating standards for different topics, like whether it's parcels, addresses, what have you. We also have those mechanisms in place for those things. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there right now. As a, like we are thinking of, we are kind of leaning in that direction at some future point, but it's probably going to kind of come out because of our need to do something with, something like the strategic plan. Go ahead, Meg, sorry.
Thanks, Alfredo. I was wondering about the stakeholder outreach. Is there something happening in those locations where you're like you're adding this outreach onto it, or like how's the stakeholder outreach working? And to follow up with that, are you planning or able to do any kind of presentation at SNEPA in early October, which is like the first week of October in New Haven?
To your two questions, I wasn't familiar with SNEPA, though there's no reason why we couldn't at least do some kind of introduction or to the topic regarding the stakeholder process. So these will be by invitation to the community. They'll see the information that we've collected so far, including all the kind of high priority topics, are like about 45 of them. And what we're going to do, I will lay those out and have some kind of mechanism, probably some kind of worksheet or something, where they'll get a chance to go through and prioritize what they think is important. And then we'll aggregate those and then bring that back into the assessment for the strategic and implementation phase.
Okay, so you're opening it up to like the community of, say, Ridgefield, like to the town, or like.
I mean, these will be people who are both GIS professionals, but also users, like people in public works, maybe surveyors, different professional groups that are GIS adjacent. They may not be full-time GIS professionals, but they may use spatial data. They may interface with people who use spatial data every day. So it's a little broader, but the honest truth is that this whole outreach from the beginning has been broader than just the core GIS community, because really, there's a much larger number of people who should be using imagery and elevation data and all the ancillary products than the core groups that we interact with on a day-to-day basis.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Okay.
Yep.
And Megan, why don't you send me that reference for the that presentation or that meeting you're talking about? I wasn't familiar with that one.
Yeah, that's the Southern New England American Planning Association. Yeah, E is for England. Yeah. So it's planners from Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, and they're all going to be at the Omni doing a thing, having a shindig. So it's a good opportunity to reach out to people who use GIS but aren't GIS professionals per se.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
All right. So if that's it for the strategic plan, thank you, Carl. So now we're going to move on to David's portion of the presentation, where he's going to cover broadband mapping, parcel and camera processing, and then the addressing and geocoding. Go ahead, David.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Just a real quick update on these three projects for the GIS office. We just sent out data request for the fourth data request to ISPs for all of their broadband data. We should be receiving that at the end of September. This also included some locations that require verification, as there are a lot of locations currently in the fabric that are marked as unserved that are right next to a building that is served, and vice versa. So we have a few locations. And then we will be publishing new maps for December 1st based on this next data collection. For the parcel and camera processing, after receiving all of the data, we still haven't received updated parcels from some towns, so we're using the previous years, which are probably just as good, given the lack of updates in some towns. We've completed, I want to say, Leah has completed the statewide parcel layer at great personal expense. So everyone should applaud Leah. And she's finishing up link field and domain verification. And so we are making rapid progress toward being able to publish a statewide parcel viewer. And we've already been able to put that layer to use for some internal purposes. I've been able to use it for broadband address verification, and we have already been talking with the Department of Agriculture about ways that we can automate some of their processes by using that layer. So many good things coming there. On addressing and geocoding, we've started the address verification process that we reported on earlier, where we're taking a number of different state data sets and using those to check the likelihood that an address is real or correct, and then narrow down the list of addresses that needs to be more manually verified. And I want to give credit to Sarah for taking the lead on that and doing a lot of good work there. So all of those things are coming along and should be coming together in really important ways, allowing us to make more use of the other data sets together. So there's a lot of synergy between these three topics. Thad.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for taking my question. So you're doing all this incredible work, and I applaud both you and Leah and the staff there. My question is with regards to the addressing. You're doing this address verification information, and I was wondering if that, when you run across these discrepancies, when you find that an address might be questionable, are you going to in turn go back to the source of that data, i.e. the towns, or what is going to be done with that information based on the discrepancy?
So we currently receive no address information directly from towns, right? So we might get data that towns sent to Dan over at DESP, but our address data is primarily coming from different state agencies or Dan, right? So we're getting that indirectly from Dan that comes from the towns. And then so what we're trying to do with this process is create basically a grade for every address in the state. How frequently is it appearing? What are the different versions? So we will create a dictionary of different spellings and different signposts so that when somebody uses what is actually on the post but is not the same as what DOT has in their layer, etc., we will know that those things are actually the same. And this comes from, okay, we know that these addresses have a low score. In the event that we go to that and it sure looks like it's an address, but there's a conflict about what that address should be called, then yes, we'd be trying to send that data back to either towns or other places that can verify that address. But the key here right now is that after adding what is now something like 550,000 addresses, there's a big lack of clarity on which ones of those really should be there, and if any of them are, just repeats with different names and that kind of thing. So this process is to weed those out and give us a much narrower scope of addresses that need to be manually verified.
I guess my thoughts are just that if the towns or municipalities that maintain the address data, or even if the regions, I guess, as well in some cases, could be of any use or any help to maybe resolve conflicts or, ultimately make the data cleaner or make the data more accurate so that, we don't run into this year after year after year after year after year.
Yeah, that would be awesome, and it is part of our long-term plan is to make the submitting of new addresses all to one place, right? So right now, some of them through PSAPs give it to Dan, and there's a number of different data flows that are not going to the same place and are not talking to each other. So that's the long-term goal, and I think we would love to have municipal help on this, but we also don't want to announce something and be like, hey, municipalities, here's another burden for you. So we want to try and do this first in this way that we can say, all right, we're pretty sure that this is solid. Now let's make sure that the update process can keep this solid. So this is just sort of the first step, but definitely we will stay in touch with you on that.
And I will add, this is like long term. Like we do want this to be kind of like we don't want this process to add a burden. We want this to, we want to create a solution that kind of creates a relief for this work and an outlet for this stuff to go to, because like it's important for all of us and this consolidated data set will be beneficial to all. So like, it's not like you guys are just kind of, throwing that data into the void and then, not getting anything back. A statewide, like as good as it can be address data set is going to be absolutely invaluable. And, with our plan to actually incorporate it into a statewide free geocoder, I mean, that's going to make it even more powerful for anyone that needs to do geocoding of data. Across the board. I did see a comment in there from our planning standardization. We do have a standard schema that we are looking at to create for a master address layer, and then we will reformat those into its relevant derivatives. Like, if we need to make a version for E911, we will make a version for E911, and it'll be a derivative of the master data set, unless David cares to disagree with me.
No, I think Caleb is asking about the parcel layer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For standardization. And so we have selected about 40 fields that are our initial target for standardization because just across the towns, there's a range of about 60 fields to the full 139. And then actually there's a few that just give us 188, just everything that is possibly in their CAMA system. And there's a lot of variation between those and a lot that we know are too inconsistent to actually standardize across the state. So we've selected about 40, I think it's actually 37, but the number is escaping me, that we're gonna actually run a few scripts on to make sure that the attributes are within a standard range and following certain domain rules. And those will be joined to the parcel layer for the viewer. And then we'll be working on expanding that and working with towns and our wonderful friends at the COGS to try and improve that process so we can do more with that and make sure that more of those attributes are making it into the statewide layer. But right now, the variation across towns is significant enough that trying to get 80, 90 attributes standardized across would just be a fool's errand. And in terms of precisely when we can expect the state parcel viewer, I don't want to give a date because as soon as I do, we will fail. But I think certainly by the end of the year, I don't think that's a problem at all. And depending on the version of it that you are looking for, I think a bit sooner than that. So we're going to it's going to be an iterative process, and trying to develop a parcel viewer that actually works when you pull it up is a bit of another problem. So there will be a thing that works first, and then we have to work on the optimization of that and how it's relating to the different CAMA tables and stuff to find the best possible way to host that. But I would say end of the year is a very safe bet.
And then as an interesting little factoid, I believe there are about 1.3 million parcels in the whole state. Does that sound right, David and Leah? So yeah, that's a lot. All right. Any additional questions for David on parcels, addresses, and broadband? All right, moving right along. So we'll parse it off to Thad now to talk about the parcel drafting guidelines working group. Take it away, Thad. I'll stop my share.
Okay, do we have a visual on my screen?
We do.
Okay, so thanks, Alfredo. I appreciate the opportunity. The Connecticut GIS Advisory Parcel Data Creation Working Group has been working for, good part of a year plus now on trying to put our hands around and finish up a standardized document that will provide folks with some valuable information they can use in doing the creation of the parcel geometry. So today I'm going to hit on a few highlights, and I'm also going to offer up some content for review by the Advisory Council, soliciting feedback and input just to make sure that we're going in the right direction as we believe, and to get your opinions and feedback and input on this. Our intent is that this will be a living, breathing document, not one that will just kind of sit static, but one that will be, revisited on a regular, schedule, so that we can maintain it and keep it up to date and make it useful and valuable to users, because that's ultimately what our goal is. So when we set out some document goals for this, trying to maintain a standard, so creating this common framework, as it says here, really looking at the creation of the GIS data sets and talking about the geometry aspect of it, right? So explaining to folks first and foremost, the uses of the data and what's involved in creating the data was really kind of our underlying goal. And we want to make sure that people had a firm understanding of that, so that as they went through the document, that they didn't get so lost in the weeds that the document became invaluable or unvaluable and useless. So created kind of some common document goals and shared those in the intro. The document covers a select number of topics. When you look at a topic like this, I think it's very easy to kind of want to fit the world on a postage stamp, and we really wanted to avoid that. We really wanted to kind of target this document to what we felt were some of the common scenarios that folks run into when you're creating GIS geometry data for parcels, and really kind of wanted to provide them with a guide. So if they run into these and they don't spend, days or hours or weeks or months, what have you, scratching their head saying, well, how do I deal with this, or how do I represent this? And also so that we don't have 50 different types of representations of kind of the same idea across the state. Ultimately, as I said, trying to create this standard, trying to give folks a baseline that everyone can kind of adhere to some degree, so that when Alfredo and his team do stitch all these 1.3 million parcels together, that there's some cohesiveness in terms of how the data is representative of the real world. So the topics we covered, you can kind of see here, the infamous condo and trailer question with a parent-child relationship, parcels that cross a town line, which is very common, obviously, multi-part non-contiguous parcels. So here we're talking about parcels that may be split by a right-of-way or some other physical boundary. Parcel lines that associate with rights-of-ways or bodies of water, and how we rectify and remedy those. Talking about topology, obviously, because we want our data to come in clean. And then examining data sources and methodologies and tying those two together. As we know, depending on what your data source is, really impacts what methodology you use to add that data to your parcel data. And then finally mentioning feature level metadata. So really wanted to kind of hone in specifically on these topics. So we'll kind of go a little bit into it. I guess the first thing we're seeking feedback from the council, and I'll kind of leave this slide up here for a bit, is have we covered what are the integral topics, the integral concerns of folks who are going to be creating this data? So by all means, we can discuss that for a minute or two today. And then I also would like to get the advisory council's view of the depth of the level of content, technical information. So how much of the nuts and bolts do we need to kind of put out there for folks in terms of, you need to have, this tool to do this, or you need to do this specifically that way, draw your lines like this, put your boundaries in like that. How technical do we need to get with that process and our text? And then the last thing that I'd like to do is I'll put up a brief portion of a section that I'll leave up on screen, and we can discuss in terms of how it's currently written, what advice or recommendations we might have with regards to that section, because my goal today really is to get the advisory council a little more involved in our process in terms of providing us feedback, so that we as the working group are sure to make sure that our end product meets the needs and desires of the advisory council as a document that we want users to have access to. So with that said, I will welcome feedback from members of the council with regards to the topics we have covered, and then if you'd also like to address the question of in terms of the depth of technical information that you would suggest or recommend. Emily, go right ahead.
Sure, thanks. So I think the list looks great from what I know. In terms of depth, I would say put those details in there. There are a lot of new folks that don't necessarily know all the tools or the tricks of the trade that someone who's been doing this for a while has learned over time. So even if it's an appendix, a cookbook style thing, although you don't need so much detail that gets out of date, but like generally tools and settings, I think is extremely helpful.
I like that. Thank you. I like the idea of the cookbook. We'll definitely look to incorporate that. That's a great idea and concept. Jenny Petrurio, I see you have a hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think to build off Emily, even some shortcuts too. Because when you're in there and you're working in it a lot of us that have spent 40 hours a week doing it have good shortcuts. People have not spent 40 hours a week might not.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm curious if we should include a listening song list, but that's a different question. Anyone else have recommendations with regards to the topics that we have covered or the level of depth? Okay, I appreciate that. Oh, go right ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but so I think I did want to maybe we can kind of expand and talk a little bit about how this would differ from a kind of like a more formal parcel standard, and kind of differentiate between the two. I know we talked about this like way back in March of 2022. It's not that far, but seems like a long time when you're doing this all day, every day. But maybe if we could just kind of reiterate what the original intent of this document is and what it isn't, just so that we can be, really clear, because I think that can also help to kind of guide what, do we need additional topics? Do we need to pull some out? Maybe that affects the, the level of depth in the technical content.
Sure, and I appreciate that, Alfredo. As you recall, back in March and even a little after that, we really struggled with this question of, okay, we had outlined the goals for the document, but we really struggled with, wanting to maintain that this is strictly focused on the geometry creation. So, often our conversations strayed to, well, do we need to have this attribute or that attribute? And many times we had to kind of pull back on our own reins and say, okay, let's go back to the intended goal, right? This is to help folks focus on how those polygons are drawn with regards to, again, do we butt up against the right of way? Do we how do we represent the right of way? There was a question of, in terms of the construction, well, do you start with lines, then create polygons? Well, no, that's old technology. Now we just heads up digitize the polygons directly. We talked about, with regards to source level information, looking at deeds, and when deeds make reference to natural markers and things like those, and how do we incorporate that? So there was a lot, but ultimately we kept focusing on the goal of having to provide instruction with regards to the geometry, and knowing that there was going to be a parcel standard that would cover attributes and those kinds of things. We did want to touch on, the obvious tie of the poly that attribute information and back to the CAMA, and the need for there to be that correlation. But again, really wanted to make sure we were focusing on that geometry creation, so that when folks ran into a situation like we show here, some of these things, the parcels that cross a town line, or the condominium conundrum that just about all of us have had to deal with, and how do you do it, and getting everyone to kind of pick one of two methods, and I'll get to that in just a second. That's actually the section that I'm going to present to the advisory council to look at, to get feedback, because as we all know, with the condos, there's a dozen different ways to try and resolve that issue and show what's a real world representation. So yeah, so as I said, the focus really needs to be maintained on the geometry aspect with a respectful nod in the direction of the attributes and the important role that those play. Anyone else has any further comment or contributions toward this? Otherwise, I'll go on to the text review.
No, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I know this is kind of a lot. This is probably the worst PowerPoint slide that I've ever created just for the level of text on it. Far more than my 3 or 5 word standard, but really wanted to kind of present this to the advisory council. So this is the section we currently have written for condos, the condos and trailers for trailer parks. And essentially we introduced the idea of what that geometry represents. And we mentioned how there are 2 acceptable methods that we could all agree on within the working group. And both of those involve the idea of overlapping polygons. You know, there was discussion about, well, you know, it breaking the overlap rule in terms of topology, but many of us, you know, commented on the importance of needing to maintain, you know, the defined areas of things as they represent the property through the camera. And so the only way to really, you know, represent that fairly and legitimately was with the idea of overlapping polygons, whether it was for the outline of the individual building or unit, or if it was to echo the shape and size of the parent parcel that these properties sit on. And then, as you can see, we got a little reference at the end of what tools to use. And while this relates back to my previous slide where I talk about, you know, what depth of content, we tried to really, you know, hold back the train. And so I'd love to get feedback on you know, what the advisory council thinks with regards to our approach and how we presented the information with regards to how to implement this solution. So I'll give folks a little more chance to kind of read all the text on the screen. I hope it's coming across in a readable size, but would love to get feedback from folks on kind of how we approached it and the solution that we proposed.
I think one thing I'd like to add here as well is one of the aims that we were trying to aim for is to be somewhat platform agnostic and kind of method agnostic. You know, we wanted to talk about the various tools and methods in a somewhat conceptual but practical level. You know, we didn't want to say, oh yeah, you can solve this problem by using the Esri parcel fabric, you know, because not everybody has access to that software. Not everybody either, you know, has the capacity to shift a tool like that. So we wanted to make sure that that, you know, like what we suggested could imply the use of a tool like that, but didn't necessarily preclude the use of something else to achieve the same goal. So that's also something that kind of why it reads the way it reads a little bit. Just a slight point of clarification there.
And that again kind of goes back to the initialization of the group. All of us kind of recognize that need to maintain an agnostic approach, as Alfredo said. And we all know that there are within the state, you know, haves and have-nots among towns. You know, and those that choose to use open source applications for their data creation. So it's really kind of it's more challenging from someone who has been so tied to a specific technology brand. It's almost a real challenge for me to kind of remove that wrapper, if you will, and kind of look at it from a general approach. But that is really kind of one of the underpinning goals of our document as well. I often find it's like trying to explain to someone how exactly it is to walk or to tie your shoe or something that we all kind of just take for granted. So any input, any feedback, recommendations or suggestions? Caleb, go right ahead, sir. Caleb, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, no, I appreciate this. This is super helpful for me. I will say I've run into the second method a lot where you kind of have coincident duplicate geometry layered on top of each other. And just from a kind of a working perspective, it does make things like spatial joins or other things kind of tricky, especially if you're trying to look at individual building records, and being able to identify, which parcel record does this, which building footprint does this correspond to when you have the whole condo association duplicated 400 times on top of each other. So I don't know. I mean, obviously there's only so much you can do in terms of influencing how people do things, but that is one thing that I've was dealing with just this week and was like, what is going on here when I have a 401 joins on a single location? It's like, oh, it's a condo.
Yeah, I've found though that it does aid in doing things like when the police will ask you to run a buffer, and capture whatever crosses around a particular location. And if you miss a particular resident and then suddenly they're calling the mayor, whoever, because their neighbor was made aware of something that they weren't because the buffer just missed their building outline by a fraction of a hair width. So yeah, so I understand what you're saying in terms of the weight that it creates within the data, but like I said, I've also seen where it has been the solution to problems.
Fair enough. Yeah, definitely.
And anyone else have feedback? I appreciate hearing.
Yeah, I just want to add to that response that like the from a data creation perspective, like the full condo parent outline is a way of simplifying the creation of the parent-child relationship without having to go through the trouble and difficulty of creating a polygon for every sub address, which is not an insubstantial amount of work. So it is absolutely a compromise. Maybe not necessarily the best way to do it because of things like buffers and things like that, where like rightfully so, like if it's either in or it's out, it needs to be in or out. But from a cost and creation standpoint, that's kind of why that recommendation is there, because that can be a good. We felt that was a good compromise for kind of for those that might not have the resources to actually go full on into like identifying each individual unit where it actually exists in space.
Well, I appreciate any input that anyone from the council has. So by all means, if you're not able to do so now, by all means, feel free to contact me directly or contact me through Alfredo, and we'll be more than happy to take your recommendation, suggestion under consideration.
All right, thank you much. So now I will pass it off to Emily. Sorry, I blanked out for a second. To talk about the work that the GIS Clearinghouse Working Group has been doing.
Thanks, Alfredo, and thanks, Thad. I will just say I'm a little bit under the weather, so please fill in if I forget something. I'm not having the clearest head at the moment. So our working group started, I think, about the same time as the others, soon after the GIS office was created. We have been working hard over the past year plus and have a nearly complete draft of what we've been working on. And my hope is that at least the council members receive the summary today. Let me just mention the members of the group. Also, besides me and Alfredo, is Tucker Beckett at Westcog, Stu at Deep, Michelle Giorgiani at Sanborn and AppGeo, Eric Lindquist from DPH, Miriam Oliveris from Yale, and Jenny also on here from DOT, and Pauline, who I think is also on from OPM. So the group together, we started talking and decided we really could learn a lot from other states who are a lot further along than us. So we did this survey kind of approach that we've done before to visit all of the other states' GIS clearinghouses, including some large cities, which are similar to size of our state. And we ended up creating a large spreadsheet matrix with all different topics that we were looking for at the different clearinghouses, and primarily looked for those that ranked very high on a particular topic. Maybe it's map viewers, or maybe it's help pages, or maybe it's data access or data formats. And then together we, after we divided that up and conquered, we discussed each of those criteria and looked at the ones we liked best and tried to boil down what it was that we would want to see in our own clearinghouse. So that was very helpful. During this process, the GIS office did come out with the geodata portal built using Esri's hub. And they did use a lot of the preliminary recommendations that we had come up with, but we certainly weren't finished. So we're kind of like straddling this, where we are trying very hard not to react to the existing geodata portal, but come up with our wish list of what we would want our overall clearinghouse to be like, and then leave it up to the GIS office to figure out how to necessarily implement those things. So we're really clear on terminology. The geodata portal is what exists. It's what's up now and working. And the GIS clearinghouses are kind of theoretical thing and criteria. So I did explain that in our 2-pager, which was very hard to get to be short, but it is there at the top. So let's see. So I don't have slides. I didn't really want to go through every single topic because there are quite a few. I was hoping to kind of open it up for discussion in hopes that you guys at least have had a chance to skim it and see if there's anything missing or that needs to have more stress on any particular topic. So Alfredo, please weigh in, or I'm open to any kind of comments that we can fold into our final report and guidance document.
Well, I mean, I think from my perspective, you know, like I'm really hoping that this kind of document will help give us some good ideas and things to challenges to strive for, because you know, like we've built a thing and it, you know, does the job reasonably well, but I want this thing to be the best possible version of itself, and I think that's really what I'm hoping to get out of this document. I mean, there may be some things in there that are like technically infeasible at the moment, but the technology might evolve and mature at some point in the future that might allow for, you know, like the text description of a map to occur in real time. You know, like that's technically very difficult at the moment, but you know, like maybe something like a ChatGPT derivative some point in the future can do that. Having those kind of lines in the sand that kind of say, hey, this is like ultimately, you know, technology and money no object is what we would like to do, is like what I'm hoping to get out of that.
Yeah, go ahead.
First and foremost, kudos to the group for the level of effort and the work and the hours and the sweat, blood, and tears that you guys put into it, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty comprehensive. You guys have really put a lot into it. The only thing I was thinking maybe as an addition would be kind of almost like a highlight or a focus, if you will, spotlight, if you will, on a particular data set, maybe on a you know, some sort of cycle or schedule to let people really know what data we have. I mean, it's a wealth. It's you know, it's an incredible wealth of data that we have, and maybe just, you know, once a month or something like that, kind of this cycle of, you know, hey, we're going to introduce you to this data set, which you may or may not even know exists. Here's what it represents. Here's where it comes from. Here's what's in it. Here's what it shows, and here's how it may be used, or here's what it may provide. You know, the map in terms of what it would do to enhance, whether it's part of the base map or some sort of enhancement, if you will, to other data. But other than that, I think you guys, you know, did an outstanding, noteworthy job.
Thanks, Sai. We actually do have that buried in here, highlight featured data sets or items as well as framework data sets, but I think you took it to the next level, was to almost make it a data story, which is a very powerful thing I've seen on some of the federal websites, especially NOAA. They're very good at that, and it really does give people new ideas. So perhaps there'll be some capacity to do that in the future. It's a good idea. Thanks.
I think one thing I would also like to hear from this group, especially from, those of you that are not at state agencies, or even those of you that are, is like, like, how would you want to use, such a thing? Like, what kinds of benefits would you want to get out of a GIS clearinghouse, whether it's a geodata portal or something else that it may evolve into at some point down the future? I would be really interested into hearing like what we anticipate, like how would we want to use this thing? Like what are we hoping to get out of it? And have we encountered any limitations currently? Meg.
Hi, surprise! I have a comment. So so my particular firm, we have, I don't know, probably 100 people pulling data for GIS in Connecticut all the time. The things that would really make sense is to be able to have that window that other geodata portals have, where you can like filter and examine the data before you download it. The links to services that like we have on CT Eco, brilliant. Instructions on how to use the service, not only in ArcGIS and Esri-based products, but also through the use of the ArcGIS for AutoCAD toolbar. I don't know if anybody here is really aware of that. It's something I'm trying to push my staff to use. It allows CAD users to consume GIS data directly through ArcGIS Online. So a guidance section on that. The website accessibility recommendations are great. I don't know if the state's policy is in line with the federal 508 policy. But now if you're getting federal dollars for projects, you have to have you have to meet other accessibility guidelines. I would imagine that Connecticut's are in line with the federal, but just in case, that's a good one. And then what was the other thing? And really based on the way that we use and consume data, having it available at the town boundary is really important. So just as as a comment on that one, that makes, I tried organizing data on our server by cogs, and nobody knows who is in what cog.
That's
So
for download, Meg, by town? Is that what you're
for
saying?
download or by service. I don't know, like, I mean, we're talking pie in the sky level complexity, but it would be beautiful if you have your data organization by type and category like you do. But if we had all the money in the world, if there was a rest directory by town where you could pull in that folder and have all of the town's state level data just batch in, or at least be listed, aquifer protection zones and, all the deep data and all the state data and the buildings and the blah, blah, blah. High in the sky, that would be a beautiful thing. And then I've always also too wanted to have that guidance where if we can improve the data and send it back, like that kind of a pipeline, that kind of like, like I ran into an issue. Stuart was fantastic in helping me, where there was a water body, a little bit of a water body that was misclassified, and it was screwing up a permitting application that we were doing for a drainage project, because the federal application thought that this piece of water body was a river, and it was really a drainage ditch. And they're like, yo, it was going to trigger all these different levels of permits and review and whatever. So I did a little research, found that no, this is really not a river. Talked to Stewart, sent a bunch of evidence in, actually edited the data and sent it as an example. and it got changed, which was great. But if there was just like a more formal way to fix things, you know, that would be awesome.
Great feedback. Maybe there's something with filtering in the hub or something that we could.
Meg, just for clarification, would it you could go to a single page, select from a list of services, and then drop down for town, and it would grab each of those services filtered to that town? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not, I would never, I wouldn't propose to prescribe a solution, but yeah, if there was a way to make it really easy to sort, filter, or whatever by town boundary would really be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? John, Stuart, anyone else have thoughts on, you know, like the use of the geodata portal, what you'd like it to be, or what you would like it to do that it doesn't already?
We're Deep is a primary data source provider, so the more ways we can get our stuff out to more people is good. Having using our own hub for as long as we have, I don't really think of it as through the mind of a consumer, so it's kind of hard for me to come up with suggestions for the future. But as long as the ability for agencies to collaborate through AGOL is covered, and we can get data to each other through shared means, even if it doesn't end up on the hub site, that would be Deep's priority when it comes to data from other locations.
I guess Meg, then Scott, or Meg, do you still have your hand raised from before?
No, I just had one other comment, and this is another thing I think I addressed with Stuart the other week. I wanted the 1934 aerial, some of the other historical aerials, that used to be hosted by Magic, and they're not hosting those FTP sites anymore. I found, like, through our server and whatever, a link to get the file that I wanted, but it was not easy to find, and I don't know if all the data that's been on Magic has gotten where it's going to live now, and the relationship with that organization, and then maybe Data Haven, and partnering with them too as well. And I will not raise my hand for anymore.
Some of those layers have been carried over, I believe, and Emily can speak to this better than I can. But the 1934s, at the very least, are on the eco servers as well. Megan,
maybe it was the 50s.
Oh, you sent me that email and then you said you found the data. I was going to write that, but yeah, some of it is on eco.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So let me answer that, Scott, and then you can ask your question. Magic underwent a big transition. There's now a new Magic librarian, and she's getting her feet under her and figuring out what they're going to do with all of that. In the meantime, I do have access to all of those files. I have not really been able to do a lot with them, but if you need something, and we are UConn, the college, and various research projects. There's a lot of projects that want those 1934s georeferenced much better than they are in that mosaic. So we are working tile by tile and are slowly building a service, but it's very spotty. It's a lot of tiles. But we can share that too. So the Magic Mosaic is a service on CT Eco and in the aerial viewer. And then we're working on a mosaic data set tile by tile, which will be an improved version done who knows when.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, thanks. One of the things in the summary document is the two-way communication, hearing from users and getting feedback. I know we put up, there's a survey on the geodata portal. I know actually, Emily, thank you to you again for setting up. There's a webinar through UConn to go over the geodata portal in a few weeks. Are there other things for the advisory council members to say, like, here's a place that you should be reaching out to or get feedback or do a webinar or something with it to raise awareness and to hear from users? Here's what I would like to see. This is a helpful discussion, but I think it helps to understand if from the members on the council, if there's, oh, you should talk to this group or talk to, do a demo for these folks so they could provide more feedback. That's, we could definitely take feedback, but your ideas on where to gather that would be helpful. Or to do things like the webinar that Emily set up, which is a great idea. So.
Well, everyone's thinking of their great ideas. I'll put that link in the chat, and Alfredo and I have talked about like a blog or some other ways of communication so that there's more ability to disseminate this information than our advisory council meetings and other things. So yes, specifics are welcome, but I think that's definitely something that we keep talking about.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I mean, I think we're in the GIS office, we're trying to kind of come up with some ways to communicate a little bit better with the community and having some like updates and, almost like a blog-like element, and then a newsletter, which we're going to start to prototype after this meeting, which will include some of the information that was talked about in the meeting. To kind of do that so that we can capture, like I say, all of the updates that that we wanted to talk about, and like from between meeting to meeting and that kind of cadence, and then some of the happenings of the meeting itself. These are some of the ideas that we're also talking about in terms of communication and like what we send out, and it's kind of like inviting conversation from the professional community, but also just in the larger state community in general. So we are thinking about it and trying to come up with a good solution that works for us to be able to maintain.
There is a section in the document, and we talked about a ticketing system if the GIS office got overflowing with things. I know some departments and agencies have that. So yeah, if you think there's kind of like the internal communication, the two-way thing, and then there's how the website can help get information out to all the users. So any other suggestions, very much welcome.
Yeah, thanks to Eric. Yeah, we are also trying to figure out how to communicate better with academia at large, beyond the stakeholders that we already engage with. That's as they're underrepresented, because sometimes they're a bit of a tough nut to crack in terms of getting a hold of the right person that is going to be willing to talk and coordinate with us. We're definitely working on it and thinking about ways in which we can outreach a little bit better. Any additional questions on this topic or comments or whatever? All right. Well, I guess so that was the last major topic for discussion. I wanted to thank everybody for their time, since we're almost right at the 90-minute mark anyway. I wanted to give a special thanks out to Emily and Thad for helping out with the presentation and then kind of filling us in on the activities of their respective groups. There's all been really good information, and I think we're going to have some really good documents to kind of review and then kind of figure out how do we kind of implement some of this stuff kind of going forward, get buy-in from the wider community, and for example, in the case of the parcel drafting guidelines and things like that. How do we get people to adopt this and use it? I think maybe adding some air of formality from this group is going to be a good way to kind of approach that. But that's just maybe that's like a tidbit for people to kind of think about for maybe for the next meeting. We can talk about how do we kind of like implement some of these things that are now starting to come to fruition, and some of and kind of solidify some of the outreach that both the GIS office and the advisory council can kind of help with. Thank you for all your time, and I guess we'll call it adjourned. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.